time, because that's just what would happen.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the May Community Conversations. My name is Carl Flowers. I'm the current president of the Black Graduate Degree Council of Carbondale. This is the fourth Community Conversations co-sponsored by the NAACP as well as the Black Degree Graduate Council of Carbondale. And I want to thank the Carbondale Library for actually hosting this event for us. As you know, we've had speakers beginning in February with Dr. John Jackson sharing a recap of the 2020 census. We had Dr. Linda Renee Baker following that, speaking to us about voting rights and the Voting Rights Act and the legislation surrounding that particular efforts. Basically, last month we had Patricia Mayberry speak to us concerning the importance of our vote, not only in the primary election, but in the general election as well. All good information to us know and to follow up on, basically. And tonight we have our fourth community conversations leader, Dr. Randy Burnside. Dr. Burnside is the director of the MEDPREP program on campus, and he's an associate professor at SIU. Dr. Burnside this evening is going to be sharing his thoughts, sharing his comments on important issues associated with the June 28th primary. Because as I indicated before, this is a joint effort between the NAACP and the BGGC, and we've tried to highlight or acknowledge members of the Divine Nine as we've been having these conversations. So tonight we acknowledge Dr. Randy Burnside, who is a member of Phi Beta Sigma fraternity Incorporated. Dr. Burnside will share his comments, and then we're going to open it up for your comments and your questions. So hold hold those until his presentation is over, and after which we would try to answer those for you. So without further ado, let me present to some and introduce to other Dr. Randall Burnside. Dr. Burnside.
Thank you, Dr. Flowers. And good evening to everyone. And thanks for joining. I will start a little bit and talk. I will talk a little bit briefly about several, I think, topics and issues that have an impact more generally, but also more specifically to the primary election in June. And I will talk through them briefly. And then, I think having a conversation is probably a better way of approaching this. And so I will allow time for you to ask your questions, because sometimes that's the best way to have these discussions. You get some of the most stimulating conversation information through questions. And so I don't want to belabor the point and talk you to death about these particular issues, but I want to lay out some things that I see as being important as we move into the primary election, and then from that into the general election in November. And so one of the issues that are significantly important anytime you talk about primary elections are the issue of turnout comes up. And so, and this is, I think, especially significant in this particular primary election because it's off season. Typically the primary election takes place in March. Well, this one is taking place in June. And so it really kind of, particularly for some voters, kind of throws them out of line with how they vote. Some, as I like to say, some people are habitual voters and they know when they're supposed to vote. So any change in that process has a tendency to reduce the number of people voting because they tend to forget or don't think about a primary in June. Primaries are in March, not June. And so sometimes people don't have that at the top of their mind. And especially when they sometimes view these primary elections as low stakes or, not big deals, right? And I always argue all elections are important. And I think especially so now, given some of the more contentious issues we're dealing with as a society, turnout is especially important because turnout in the primary is prime turnout for the general election, right? And so it's also important that we narrow choices in using primary elections, because that's a part of the democratic process, but it also allows voters to make determinations about different candidates. And even if, I was talking to a friend of mine recently and they said, well, I'm a straight party line voter, right? And I won't mention which party they vote for, but they vote a straight party line. I said, well, though in primary elections, there are Democratic and Republican primaries, right? And I said, so you have to differentiate between which Democrat or Republican you want out of those group of Democrats or Republicans, which one best represents what you believe, right? And so primary elections provide you with that option, right? To select the choice out of a number of candidates typically that suit the views, the values, the beliefs, and stances on issues that are most in line with what you believe. And so there's that issue when we talk about primary elections, but also when we talk about a primary election that's out of the general primary season, it becomes increasingly important. But also having a primary in June and a general election in November shortens the campaign window. So it's important that people get involved and understand the candidates now, because we have a much shorter campaign window this year for them to get an understanding of who the candidates are. And so I think we should encourage people to get that knowledge now and then participate in the June primary, but in preparation for the general election in November. And so that's important to kind of understand. That's a very important issue, especially, like I said, with us kind of being out of sequence in terms of how we do primary elections in Illinois. And so I'll start out a little bit more local and kind of go more broadly. If you look at, for instance, the county board seats, all of the county board seats are contested except for one. right? And so as a lot of political scientists are apt to say, all politics are local, right? And so that those local board positions matter because the Jackson County Board makes a lot of important decisions that impact all of the residents of Jackson County. And so seeing that much competition in those board seats, is important and good, but it also shows how important people feel those seats are, particularly the candidates who are running for election in those seats. And I won't talk about any particular seats in the county board, which are along that board, but are the district seats. But it's important as voters and as residents of Jackson County that we make decisions about those board seats that are in what we consider to be our best interest, right? And so it's important to do that because that's one of the ways you get to voice your opinion on local issues. And so it's important, that's an important issue in this primary election, is narrowing that field for the general election. But it's also important as we think about in Illinois, we think about if we go to the top of the ballot, right? You will have both the Democratic and Republican primaries for governor. And while many people think it's odds on likely that Governor Blagojevich will win the Democratic nomination for governor, it's important to still voice your opinion by voting. The Republican side of the ballot is really interesting because there are a number of candidates there in that race, with Richard Irvin being one of them. And I was not necessarily aware of this, but Dr. Flowers reminded me earlier that Richard Irvin was a longtime Democrat and switched to the Republican Party at some point and is now running for governor under that banner. But I think more importantly about that on the Republican side, in terms of the nomination, one of the issues that came up for me and bothered me was a recent commercial that Mr. Irvin did. And some of you may have seen this commercial, and it really bothered me. And I debated whether I wanted to talk about it today or just kind of let it pass. But I think it's an issue worth talking about, given things that are happening in the country right now. And so actually, over the last week, I decided, yes, I do need to bring this up. And the reason why is that he has a commercial, and I wish I could show it to you. I couldn't find it again. I saw it on TV this weekend, or last week, not this weekend. And in that commercial, in that campaign ad, he references the left wing or liberals left wing, and it said they should be afraid of him. And so for me, the specter, the image of a Black man saying, hey, you should be afraid of me, given the national tenor of politics, given the kind of things we're seeing with the incidents in Buffalo and things like that, it really touched me the wrong way. To have someone who, to me, is so out of touch that they would think that it's okay for you to kind of gin up this kind of fear about imagery about being afraid of a Black man, given all of the race and racism and racial issues and white supremacy issues that we have going on in this country right now. The president was just in Buffalo today talking about these types of issues. And we have a gubernatorial candidate who's leading the Republican, who's the leading Republican gubernatorial candidate in the primaries, saying things like that on television publicly. And so not the only thing that he said that kind of bothers me, but that particular issue in particular for me, I think is important. I think it's important that we pay attention to those types of conversations and those types of things that people have to say, not just with Richard Irvin, but with a number of candidates who were saying things. And so it's important that we pay attention to that. I think one of the more interesting elections this year will be the Secretary of State's race. It's an open election, our current Secretary of State is retiring. And so there's a number of high profile candidates in that race on both the Democratic and Republican side. And so this gives people an opportunity. The primary election gives people an opportunity to have a real voice in who the next Secretary of State will be. All of them have statements about kind of what they want to do with the Secretary of State's office. A lot of it is around modernizing and making it more open for people and things like that. But they all take different approaches to how they want to do that. And so I think it's important as voters that we pay attention to what they're saying, because as we all know, especially during the pandemic, the Secretary of State's office and the local offices became increasingly more important when you couldn't get vehicle registrations, titles, driver's license, identification cards, all of this kind of stuff, I think became increasingly more important to us during the pandemic. And the Secretary of State's functions and job became increasingly more important for some of those things that we needed to have done that perhaps we couldn't get done in different ways. And I think that's driving some of the conversations that these candidates are having about modernizing the office more and things like that. And so I think it's important for us to pay attention to those particular issues surrounding that. And when we talk about those electoral issues, we should not forget that redistricting will have an impact on the elections. You know, we just went through redistricting and those districts are now new. And so there are candidates running in those seats. And so we need to be aware of the fact that the districts have changed and make sure we pay attention to the candidates who are running and what they have to say. Now, it seems pretty cut and dried in Southern Illinois in some of these districts. We have incumbents running, and so I think there won't be a lot of challenge, but it's still important that we get out here, listen to the candidates, and voice our opinion and cast our ballots. I think increasingly, given the issues that we're dealing with, it's important for us to do that. And I say that because the issues surrounding race and racism aren't going anywhere. There's a national dialogue about that. And to some degree, state and local dialogues about that. You know, we see a lot of that dialogue right here in our own local community with some of the stances that one of the largest employers in our district, the Southern Illinois University, has taken in terms of anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they've been very public about those stances that they're taking as a system. And so there's some impact in terms of those types of conversations we're having in our own community about how we want to treat people and how we want to move forward as a community with a university as a part of that community. But when we also talk about electoral politics, we need not forget the importance of an institution like SIU and how the state budget impacts what that institution is able to do in our community. And so those people we're electing to statewide office, but also to represent us in the House and Senate districts in Southern Illinois will help dictate those things like budget and the amount of money that goes to higher education. And those of us who live in Southern Illinois in particular, in Jackson County, Williamson County, and some of the other counties, Union County down here, there are a lot of people who are employed by SIU. And so those budget concerns should be real for all of us in terms of budgetarily how money is allocated to SIU and some of the other larger institutions, state institutions down here. And so it's important to look at the candidates for those particular offices and make decisions based upon some of those factors as well. And so, you know, I think there will always be this conversation about COVID-19 response and mask mandates. There's been a heated debate, and that debate still continues even with the mask mandates primarily lifted. There's still conversations among these people who are running for office now about how, particularly in the governor's race, about what the COVID-19 response was and how people felt about it. And, you know, working as part of a medical school, I would tell you, you know, while we have seen the numbers decline greatly, COVID-19 is still a significant medical issue and can also, you know, we hope the numbers continue to go the way that we see them going. But, you know, I think we may be in a period where we might see more of these types of issues where we have to make decisions that become politicized about what we need to do to protect the larger society in terms of health. And so I think people are debating this because as we move forward, how COVID-19 was handled and continues to be handled will be used as an exemplar in the future in terms if some of these things rear their ugly heads again further down the road. And so It's an important conversation to have and thoughts to have when we're making these decisions about who we want in elected office. And so I think one final issue that I'll talk about, which is not being, well, there's a couple of issues. One that's not being voted on in this election is the issue around a woman's right to choose an abortion. The leaked brief and all this stuff about the Supreme Court may be preparing to overturn Roe v. Wade and the ramifications of that. There are national ramifications for that, but there are also state and local ramifications for that. And some of you may have noticed a few days ago that the mayor of Chicago came out and said they would do whatever they could if Roe v. Wade was overturned to help women, to provide women a safe place and sanctuary and assistance to pursue whatever option they wanted to choose in terms of their rights to choose. And what a lot of people don't understand is if Roe v. Wade is overturned, in many instances, it opens up the door for states then to make decisions about a woman's right to choose, right? So they can weigh in on either side of the debate. And so who we put into those elected office seats become vitally important in the types of decisions you'll get on issues like a woman's right to choose. And the final issue I'll talk about, which is not necessarily a part of this primary election, but will be on the November ballot, is the Illinois right to collective bargaining, the constitutional amendment that will be on the November ballot. Again, it's important. You either like or don't like that type of policy, and there are people who are opposed or for it or opposed to it. But remember, it came about because of elected officials, people who, bigger picture, we elected to office, whether they support or don't support it. That ballot initiative or that ballot or the constitutional amendment will be on the ballot because elected officials decided it was something that needed to be there, something that Illinois needed to tackle. And so those types of issues will continue to come up. And we often see ballot type issues come up on the ballot. And so it's important as we go to the polls and we elect people that we keep in mind that we're not just electing people, we're electing people to voice our concerns and to deal with issues that we deem necessary. And so it's important that we keep that at the forefront of our mind as we encourage not only people in Jackson County, but people across the state to participate in the primary election, because there are some ramifications beyond just kind of what we would normally think in this particular election. So I'll stop there and allow people to ask any questions they may have.
Okay, I ask one to start out with Dr. Burnside. You had mentioned that we're in a practice of understanding when we're able to vote, and the primary season has changed from doing it in March to June. What was the reasoning there? Why the change?
I think it was primarily based out of concern about COVID-19, because they had to make a change. You had to change in advance, right? So it wasn't we can wait till March to make the change. So when they made the change, it was back when the numbers were significant. And so I think the change was made to move it back in part because of COVID-19 concerns.
Okay. Okay. My second question, I'm sure there are going to be others and things, but as you think about the primary system, are we still under the practice of having to choose a Democratic ballot or Republican ballot, or does the primary allow the other voter to say, I want to vote for blah, blah, who's Republican, and blah, blah for Democrat?
Repeat that. I think I understand what you're asking. Do you have to select a particular ballot and then vote that ballot?
One or the other, yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Still,
That is
okay,
my understanding, yes.
okay.
And I see Jill responded there. She said the changes were at least in part because a redistricting had to be finished first and the late census result led to a delay. And that's absolutely correct too. I think there's a combination of factors there. And that was one of them too. And I neglected to say that. So Jill, you are correct.
Okay.
Because redistricting is always a contentious issue. And I know it's been contentious in Illinois, but let me tell you, I've worked in some states with redistricting back when I was a political scientist. And Illinois is a cakewalk compared to especially some of the southern states in terms of how they do redistricting and how bitter the fights can get in terms of redistricting and how partisan the fights are. And so, yeah, the census definitely caused a delay as well.
So speaking of that, then there have been in Southern Illinois, what had been one district that encompassed Carbondale and Murfreesboro and part of Marion now is broken up. No, now that one particular district covers Murphy, Carbondale, Marion, and a much larger area. Oh, is that, who does that favor? Are Republicans or Democrats, in your view?
I would say, in my view, I think when you kind of broaden the district, especially in Southern Illinois, I think especially once you get outside of Jackson County, it favors Republicans. It really favors Republicans, in my opinion. I don't think it favors Democrats at all. I think once you broaden the scope down here outside of Jackson County, you're really giving more favor to Republican candidates.
Okay.
So I see that Jessica asked a question.
I want to ask, yes.
So
Go on.
she asked about a burnout factor from the 2020 election. You know, Jessica, what I would say is I think people are burnt out on politics, not just the 2020 election. I think, to some degree, people are really burned out on politics because of how divisive politics have become and because of the rhetoric that's being used and just some of the derogatory language, right? And how people are treating each other. So you could say 2020 election, but I think there was a level of burnout even prior to the 2020 election. I think beyond that, you're still continuing to see burnout increase. From COVID generally, I don't know that COVID per se is impacting that. I think it's more people are just kind of tired of the divisive politics that we are experiencing right now and kind of how divided the country seems to be around a set number of issues. And so I think a lot of people are backing away just because of how divisive things have become and how divided people have become and dogmatic about the stances that they have, right? Especially some of those who have uninformed positions that they're taking. And some of them are elected officials who are stating them like they're facts, right? They're stating things that we all know not to be true, like they're facts. And there are people who, for whatever reason, are clinging to those beliefs with them. And so it's important to kind of look at the national dialogue and how that has trickled down into state and local politics as well. Ooh, how do we fix it? If I knew how to fix it, I mean, I'd probably be a millionaire right now if I knew how to fix that problem. But I think, in terms of fixing burnout or in terms of fixing the divisive politics, I mean, I think those are two kind of different the questions. But I don't know that you fix burnout. I think people have to feel like that their opinion matters and that they're voting in competitive elections, right? That their votes matter, their voices matter, and they're voting in competitive elections, and that they're voting for candidates who represent values and issues that they believe in. I think when I've talked to a lot of Democrats and Republicans, and there are people in both parties that are dissatisfied, right? Because they don't think that either party is doing things that are in their best interest. And they think that it basically elected officials are doing what's in the best interest of themselves or interest of larger interests, as opposed to individual citizens or groups of citizens. And so I think a lot of people are kind of jaded with that type of politics, where it does not appear that politicians are responsive to the needs of people. And so I think that plays into burnout as well. And I think I think a lot of quality people are shying away from running for political office as well. And so we end up with some candidates probably who are not best suited for some positions because other people are choosing not to run because of the divisive nature of politics. And so I think those are some of the issues that are there, and how we address those, is really a tough question to answer, other than demand more of those elected officials we have and hold them more accountable. And the way we do that is ironically through elections.
Question in the Q&A. Are you able to discuss subsequent issues that can come up with if Roe versus Wade is withdrawn? I'm not sure if she meant overturned or
right.
withdrawn.
Well,
individual.
Yeah. Well, so I will say I am not a Supreme Court scholar or a legal scholar. I will put that out there right now. But just in mindset and some of the reading, there are some concerns because then it opens up, again, as I pointed out earlier, I think one of the big things that it opens up is then the ability for for the National Congress to pass legislation, right? It opens up those possibilities. And I think, I'm trying to remember which senator it was the other day. I know who it was McConnell, was talking about it opens up the possibilities for for Congress to pass legislation, right? In terms of a woman's right to choose. And so he was saying, and of course they'd be looking to do that, but it also opens up the possibility for states to, again, pass legislation that surrounds these ideas of a woman's rights to choose. And so I think advocates for Roe v. Wade are right to be concerned because those are two areas where I know many states will move quickly, state legislatures especially, to pass legislation to restrict rights. I don't know if there'll be any legislatures who will move to, expand rights, and I don't know if they can do that, but there will definitely be some legislatures that you will see that will quickly move to reduce rights or completely obliterate the rights of a woman to choose. And so I think you could also see that with the mayor of Chicago saying, hey, to some degree, this will be a sanctuary for people who are looking to have that right to choose. The city of Chicago will be doing that. And so it should be of significant concern to people how that decision, not only the overturning of it, but what they say when they do, right? So what the justices say, what the opinion of the justices are when they overturn it will be just as, I think, significant in their rationale for overturning it.
Okay, another one came up in the Q&A that asked, as when there seems to be a perpetual elections, someone's asking for a contribution and your vote every year. Is there any appetite for reducing the actual number of elections?
No, I don't really think that there's an appetite among people who can make that decision for it. Now, I think there has been some push and some progress gained in terms of people thinking about election holidays, right? Where people can get time off to participate in elections. But I don't know that there has been any real push to kind of change the process the way we have it in terms of elections, right? But I think that there has been a real push in terms of people pushing for election holidays. And so I don't know where that will end up, but I don't see the way that we elect people changing. I think that in the number of elections we have, I think that those elections will continue kind of in the way that they always have, or at least in more recent times.
Okay. Other questions in the chat or in the Q&A, anyone?
And I see that Jessica made a comment in reference to what Faith was saying about people not wanting to vote because they feel their votes don't count. And I think Jessica makes a good point. It's in local elections where you see a few votes can make a really big difference. And that was the reason why I highlighted the county board elections, right? Because a few votes in those elections can make a big difference in who gets those seats. And I think, there are people, I think, who are here who maybe have run for election or run for re-election for offices and have lost by a small margin, right? Or won by a small margin. And so it's important. I think Jessica makes a good point. It's important that we think about that, especially when we're talking about local elections. But I think in all elections, because, we've had some hotly contested presidential elections too. So it's not just local elections. I think in all elections, it's important that we don't think that people are just going to automatically win, and that we get out and vote. So
how can we? Yeah, right. So how do we know? How can we be assured that our votes are going to be counted? That is a major issue at this point, I think, Dr. Burnside.
I think it is. And I think there's a couple of things there. One, I think we have to trust the process. But two, I think we have to become a part of the process. So there are opportunities for citizens to become poll observers, to participate as part of the polling staff and teams and the people who are doing the counting. So there's opportunities for people to get involved, right? And I just think that more people should get involved in that process. And so it's not hard to get involved. And so I think more people should be involved in that process. And I think you're starting to see that at least in some areas. And I don't know about Jackson County or Carbondale in particular, but it's important that we as citizens get involved in that process and we have those particular concerns, because we can be poll observers. We can be, we can work the polls to make sure people are doing it the right way and things like that. And so those opportunities do exist. And I think that people should take more advantage of them.
So as a follow-up to that, is it an issue of being able to work the polls and making sure that all votes are being counted, but it isn't one of the issues that we don't typically vote?
Well, yeah, Dr. Flowers, I think you're right. We can start there, right? Voter turnout is bad generally and horrible in primary elections. So if we take this back to the start of the conversation in primary elections, that was one of the reasons why I talked about turnout in the very beginning, because turnout is horrible in primary election and in midterm elections when we talk about national politics, but in primary elections. And it's horrible overall, but it's atrocious when it comes to communities of color and poor communities of all color. So it's, for us to be a democratic nation, we have some of the worst voter turnout in the world. And so I think you're right. It starts with us actually voting. And I know that there are certain areas of Carbondale, and I've seen the numbers, where turnout is not good. And so, for a variety of reasons, but people need to vote. And now we have early voting. And so people who have a multitude of excuses about, well, I can't do this or I can't do that. I'm very busy myself, but I always take the opportunity to do early voting. And so we will have early voting as we always do. And so I think it's important to understand that early voting actually starts on Thursday. Thanks, Jill, for posting that. I was just about to mention that. But early voting starts on Thursday. And so I think people should take advantage of early voting. And I think Illinois has been really progressive in things like early voting, absentee ballots and stuff like that, unlike some other states. And so while some other states are more restrictive, Illinois has made it possible to allow for a lot more people to vote a lot easier, right? And so I think we should take advantage of it. But I think you're right, Carl. People don't take advantage of those opportunities and just don't vote. And it could go back to what the earlier conversation sparked by, I believe it was Faith and Jessica, and talking about why people don't vote, because they don't see candidates as being representative of those needs that they have. And so they become apathetic about voting. And what I've noticed is once people kind of step out of the cycle of voting, oftentimes it's hard to get them to go back to start voting again, right? Once they've made up their mind, kind of like, people aren't representing me, so I'm not going to do it. It's harder then to convince them. It's easier to convince a person who has never voted to vote in some ways than it is to convince a person who's given up on the process to kind of get them to come back. And I know, Carl, you worked a lot in voter registration and stuff like that. And so I know you're familiar with that process.
Okay. Are there any other questions in the chat here?
Okay, so Jessica, I see you said you meant more about the candidates, like in California, they have candidate booklets with many bios on every candidate. And you don't know if it has increased turnout, but it makes voters more informed. I don't disagree with that statement, but I also think that voters have to want to be informed. You know, and I think sometimes people are to the point where they have completely removed themselves from the process. And so I think one of the areas we need to focus on is getting people back into the process, right? Those people who have abandoned the process, or those people who have never thought that it was worth becoming a part of the process. And so candidate information, I think, is always good. And I think no one should be opposed to more information about candidates being available to voters. But I think the issue is larger than that and more systemic than just candidate information. I think some people have completely checked out of the process or never checked into the process. And so I think we have to address those issues as well.
So then what can we do as a community, as we talk about a Carbondale conversation of getting more young people to vote? They are able to vote at 18, I believe now, right?
Yes.
So what can we do as a community to get more younger people who for one reason or another aren't interested in voting, don't understand the importance of voting? What can we do as a community from a political science person, which you still are, Dr. Burnside, until you move away from that completely? What can we do there to help the community?
I think you guys are already doing some of it. I think the NAACP with kind of voter registration, also the Black Graduate Creek Council of Carbondale, also in conjunction with NAACP and other community organizations are doing that. I think, part of the thing is continuing to bring community organizations together to work together to register people, right? And then these types of conversations to help inform people about what's happening, who the candidates are, what the issues are in elections. So I think you guys are doing some of that work. And sometimes it takes a while to see that work pay off, right? You put in the work and it takes a while to see it pay off. But I would encourage you guys to continue to do things like this and to continue to register voters and to bring other groups in with you to help register voters, right? From that standpoint, in terms of getting younger voters to vote. But one of the things I think nationally that we have talked about as political scientists is that, in some countries, at birth, you become a registered voter. And when you turn the age 18 or whatever the proper age of voting is in that country, you automatically are registered, right? So that's one of the things in some other developed nations that they're doing. Like, okay, at birth, you're a citizen of the country, you have a right to vote, and when you become a voting age, you automatically have that right to vote. And so that's one thing we should seriously consider as a country. The other thing is we have to stop this arbitrary purging of voter rolls that's happening all over the country, right? And so it's important to kind of understand that we have to stop this kind of arbitrariness that we see, or this divisiveness or partisan nature of the purging of voter rolls and the lack of notification of people who are being purged from these voter rolls. That's a systemic issue in this country that has not been adequately addressed because states are in charge of election rules for their states. And so federal law only covers federal elections in states, and then states are in charge of state and local elections in their states. And so they're able to get away with these types of things because of that fact. And so I think that we need to, in some way, nationally address this purge of voter rolls that we're seeing in countries. And it was a big conversation in the last presidential election, talked about a lot in states like Georgia and other places where they were purging voter rolls with the attempt of trying to, of course, get an outcome more favorable to a particular party. And so I think those are some of the issues that we can start to talk about and try to address kind of a bigger picture. But again, I think you guys are doing a lot on the local level to inform voters and to get voters registered.
Are there any other questions in the chat? I don't see any. What's your prediction on what will happen in 2024? Okay, here we go. We're hearing
I don't make
first.
predictions. I'm not paid to make predictions. I'm not allowed to make predictions anymore after I predicted in 2016 that Donald Trump would win the presidency. My friends don't allow me to make predictions anymore. There was a little bit too much accuracy involved in that for them. So I'm not allowed to make predictions publicly anymore about what will happen in elections. I've been banned.
Okay. I see a lot of smiling faces and laughing out loud. And so would you consider making a prediction that Donald Trump won't run?
No.
2024, so that keep your accuracy rating going, basically?
I don't think that Donald Trump will get the Republican Party nomination. I won't say that he won't run, but I don't believe he'll get the nomination. I don't think he'll get the party
nomination. Okay. Okay. All righty. Other comments in the chat or in the Q&A? Anyone? If not, so I will ask you if you have any closing comments, suggestions, recommendations, predictions, and then we'll go from there.
Well, I encourage everyone to talk to everyone they know and get them out to vote, whether they're in Jackson County or anywhere else in the state. I mean, I think we all know other people in the state that are outside of Jackson County. I think it's important that we continue to encourage people to vote. And we just kind of talked about Roe v. Wade a little bit ago, but it's important to understand that in November, there's a chance to elect Supreme Court justices in the state of Illinois, in some of the areas of Illinois. And it could radically change the makeup of the Supreme Court in the state of Illinois. So I think people should read up on that. Depending upon who wins those elections, there could be a shift in the partisan makeup of the court. And there are some millionaires who are going to pump a lot of money into trying to get those changes made. And those changes have far-reaching impacts, because cases that go to the Illinois Supreme Court then can, just like at the national level, can have far-reaching implications in terms of the decisions that the Illinois Supreme Court makes. And so it's important for us to encourage everyone that we know in this state to get out and vote in the primary election, but also in the general election in November, because we'll be deciding on some key issues. I mentioned earlier the Illinois right to collective bargaining constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in November. So I think we really need to promote a culture of voting. And I think you guys are doing, I think the NAACP and the Black Greek Council of Carbondale are doing those types of things. And like I said, I encourage you to invite other people to join you in those. Not that other people in the community are not involved in voter registration and having these conversations with people, but I think a larger community conversation helps all of us. And I think you guys have done a great job in starting that and partnering with the library and doing these community conversations. And I think they need to continue, because now more than ever, and I know that sounds cliche-ish, but now more than ever, we really need to make sure that we are participating in electoral politics and understanding who the candidates are and what the issues are, so that we can select those people who are going to best represent us.
All righty. So with that, I'd like to say thank you for your time this evening. Thank you for those who have joined us on Zoom, who have joined us on the Carbondale Public Library's system. I think that there was a question asked about how can the community, not just the NAACP or not just the BGGC, how can the community get involved in like voter registration? Should there be deputy registrars at each church in the community and things like that as a beginning, possibly?
I think absolutely. I think, one of the things, Carl, I think that's a great idea, because I think one of the things I remember a number of years ago, Jackson County Health Department did something I thought was really smart. And what they did was they went to a lot of the local churches and had them select a person as a healthcare advocate or a healthcare person in their church. And then Jackson County would come in and do some things in those churches when they wanted them to, or address particular issues, right? But they had a point of contact with each church about, healthcare and things like that for their particular population. So I think you make and I thought that was an excellent idea then and still do now. I think you make an excellent point. One of the places that we can start are in these churches that are in the community. And so I think it's important. You make a valid point. And I think there are members of community organizations who I think would serve as those points of contact inside many of these churches that we have in the community. And so I think that's a way to start. I know that Pastor Chambers was on asking how people could get involved. And I think that's a way to get involved, is going through there's a ministerial alliance in Carbondale, but also contacting pastors individually and talking to them about, having that type of representation in the churches. And many of them will have people that are in the churches that are already participating, either doing some of the election work, some of the polling staff or things like that. And they're already involved as a part of the electoral process, or they belong to the NAACP or the Black Greek Council of Carbondale, and can step into those roles for them and keep them informed about those particular issues and help to register members of their congregation and clarify issues for them as well.
Okay. All right. There's someone who wanted to make a comment. I'm not sure as to how we could allow that or anything. So I'm going to leave that to Jennifer. She has okay.
Robin, you can
Robin,
unmute
not sure how we
yourself.
can.
You can unmute yourself if you'd like to talk.
Let's just let them know there was a question.
Okay,
But you already answered it now.
oh. What was it?
I had seen where Reverend Chambers had asked the questions and you were getting ready to close out. So I was waiting to make sure you didn't miss that question.
Okay, all right. I think we've tried to answer everything in the chat and in the Q&A. So again, Dr. Burnside, we want to thank you for your time this evening. This is probably one of the longest community conversations that we've had. So your intent of only talking 5 minutes did not work well. So thank you very much.
It never does, Carl.
Information,
You know
sir.
Never does. Thanks for asking me to do this. I really enjoyed it. And, you know, like I said before, please continue to do these. I think people can learn a lot from these and continue to do the good work that both of the organizations are doing along with the library in helping sponsor this, but also a lot of other opportunities and things that the library do that some people in the community don't know about. And so I applaud all of you for being
All right.
a part of this.
Well, good night, everyone.
Good night.